Hi, I'm Ken. I'm a volunteer at the Spellman Museum of Stamps and Postal History. Back on my YouTube channel, I was sharing my recent acquisition of a White Plains souvenir sheet. As part of that, I was doing some research into the Second International Philatelic Exhibition that happened in 1926 in New York City. I was struggling with finding a lot of good information about the show itself online, and I went to the museum and asked if they had any information about the show, and they had something in the library that I was able to get a hold of. This is the catalog, the official show catalog from the show, and so I was able to use this show catalog that I could get in the library's museum to do some of the research from that video. So let's take a look at that video, and we'll share some of that in the Spellman channel. In honor of the Second U.S. International Philatelic Exhibition in 1926, the post office decided to do something special for stamp collectors. They set up a booth, the largest at that stamp show, and printed copies of this souvenir sheet to be sold at the show. Unfortunately, the ones that were actually printed at the show were not perforated or gummed, and they were eventually sent back to the postal system and destroyed. None of those exist anymore. The ones that were actually sold at the show were printed ahead of the show and actually released and sold at the show. A little aside, I got the picture of that show floor from this book from the Spellman Museum. The book is the official catalog of the show. I'll put up the title page on the screen. Really nice book, a big, thick, lot of information in it. In researching the White Plains sheet, I wanted more information on the IPEX show in particular, and I was able to find really very little information about the show on the internet. But I was able to find this catalog in the museum library. The internet is great, but it doesn't have everything in it. For that matter, neither does the Spellman Museum, but it did have this wonderful resource that you just can't find online. This is one of the reasons that specialized museums and libraries are so important to us. Besides the map of the show floor, this catalog lists the show coordinators, sponsors, and judges. Let's just give you a sense of that. So here's a page of some of those sponsors and judges. Nice old-timey pictures and lots of good information about them. In the back of it, there's hundreds of listings for all the exhibits in the show. Who knows if Boston 2026 is going to have enough exhibits to outclass this. This was a time when the stamp community was huge, and even though it was early in stamp collecting, what do we have here? I think a total of 600 plus exhibits. That's a lot. Good luck, Boston 2026, but I think you're up to the challenge. Anyway, there's a few articles in here, and of course lots of historic advertising. So there's a page of advertising. Let's see. Here's another page of advertising. Almost every third page is an advertising, which is how they funded this show. The articles in here also of historic context, and these advertisements make this kind of a fun book to go through. Every copy of this catalog also included an official page of souvenir stamps, not souvenir sheets, but souvenirs from the show. Let me turn to that and show you. These were printed by the American Banknote Company, and these are really incredible stamps. There's actually 4 designs of these stamps, and I'll pop those up over the top. These feature 2 globes, a post rider, a ship, a train, and an airplane. I think that's a Jenny, but I've never seen one right side up, so I'm not really that sure. Anyway, funny jokes from me. This book has only 3 of these stamps. Let me just pull it up again. It only has the 3 of these stamps, and I can't say why, although these 3 stamps aren't even hinged into this book. As I was checking on how they were attached to this page, one of them came loose so I could see the back, and it looked like it had been stuck down to something else. Not this book, and the back was looked like it had been just licked and stuck to something, and years later maybe ripped off. There was a giant thin spot, and then it had been lightly licked back to be stuck into this book. Yikes! Anyway, I took the one that I checked. I hinged it neatly back into this book. Hopefully, no more damage will come to the stamp. Anyway, I was thrilled to get this book and look through it. Don't forget that the Spellman Library exists, the Spellman Museum exists, and it can be a great partner in any philatelic research that you're doing. Now, let's get back to looking at those White Plains sheets. Instead of printing the sheet in panes of 100, they printed up 4 panes of 25 stamps per pane on one bigger sheet. I couldn't find any examples of that pane of 4 souvenir sheets. Perhaps none exist, I'm really not sure. Anyway, coming off the press, they would have looked something like this. Actually, the ones coming off the press would have been unperforated and ungummed. Each pane had writing along the top and bottom. On the top, you'll see International Philatelic Exhibition, October 16th to 23rd, 1926. You'll also notice the plate number below that. Along the bottom of each pane, it says New York, New York, USA, the location of the show. Above that is another plate number. Coming off the press, all 4 of these sheets would have been connected. Next, they would have been gummed and perforated before being cut into 4 sheets. It's a little hard to see, but between the sheets is a red cut line. Here's a segment of a sheet where the lines are still visible. Those red lines run the width of the sheet, and the position of remnants of those lines is one way to figure out which of the 4 plate positions a particular sheet came from. But you really don't need those lines to figure it out. Another way is to look at the gum on the back. The gum was applied before the sheets were cut, and they didn't gum all the way to the edges of the selvage. You can see which edges are the edges of a sheet because the gum doesn't go all the way to the edge. While I have this sheet up, I should mention one other thing in this image. You might notice some diagonal creases in the sheet. These were a normal part of the production process, so if you're looking to get a pristine copy of this sheet, don't worry about seeing these creases. They're not flaws in the sheet. Of course, the easiest way to tell the pane positions is that the outer frame of each sheet is wider than the inner frames. Also, the top 2 panes each have a triangular cutout that was part of the printing process. It should be straightforward to figure out which position a sheet is from based on the margins and these cutouts. Some people go as far as to find a match set of all 4 of these positions for a single plate number. You'll also notice that there are 4 plate numbers on each pane. This particular sheet shows plate number 18771, one on each edge of each pane. It turns out that 5 different plates were used to print these sheets. The first was 18770. Plate 18665 through 69 were used to print the original 100 stamp sheets. You'll also find the souvenir sheets with plates 18771, 73, and 74. Yes, I skipped 72. There was actually a plate number 18772. That was the plate that got used for the demonstrations on the exhibit hall floor. 700 of these demonstration sheets were printed, all without gum or perforations. All of these imperforate sheets were sent back to the post office department and destroyed. None seem to have escaped into collectors' hands. There are some collectors that look for all 4 positions of all 4 plates for a total of 16 sheets of this souvenir sheet. It's exhausting to even think about that. You might wonder, though, of all these 16 plate position combinations, which is the best one to collect? As it turns out, there are 2 of them that are slightly different from the others. These 2 panes have a minor plate flaw that makes them catalog for slightly more than the others. It's called the dot over the S variety. These are what are called constant varieties. That is, they exist on every copy from this plate. This plate flaw shows up on the lower left panes of plates 18773 and 74, but in different positions. I've marked the stamp where the flaw is on both those plates. You'd think that because these 2 plates are listed with the same flaw name that the flaw would be the same, but the flaws on these 2 plates are a little bit different. The 18774 plate on the right actually has what looks like a dot above the S in states. From the 73 pane, the flaw is more of a scratch in the same area that I guess ends in a dot-like clump over the same S. They really aren't the same flaw at all. While there are used copies of both the whole sheet and singles with selvage from this sheet, I'm not sure there are any known used singles with these 2 flaws. I'm not sure people really look for them. So here's an assignment. If you have a used copy of the single, which you can generally assume is from the sheet of 100, check to see if yours has one of these flaws. That would be a real treasure to find. Let's take a closer look at this particular pane now. You can tell from the wide margins and the triangle cutout on the upper right that this is the pane from the upper right of the sheet. It's possible to find an upper right sheet without the triangle cutout, but that only happens if someone trimmed off the edges of the pane. That would be a significant flaw. This is a copy that has been trimmed along the top. You can tell because the triangle's missing, and yet the top and right margins are wider than the other 2. It's possible that the top margin was damaged and someone trimmed it to hide that damage. It's also possible that someone thought the triangle cutout was a flaw and were trying to hide that. Either way, this sheet is flawed. There's another interesting way to tell with this sheet. Notice along the middle of the right edge, there's a small F in the margin. That F only appears on the upper right panes. Here's that untrimmed pane again. Notice the F? During the 20s and 30s, that F was stamped into plates after they were hardened to indicate they were ready to be printed with. Some people say that the F stands for finished. I prefer the story that the F was the stamp of the foreman of the hardening section. His name was Frank Marti, and that the F stands for Frank. True or not, it's a much better story. If I ever get another one of these souvenir sheets, and that's highly unlikely, I'll be getting an upper right pane with the cutout and the F stamp. These sheets are expensive for a couple of reasons. First, there were only 107,000 of them made. That's just 25,000 of each plate number, and another 7,000 of the demonstration plate number that was destroyed after the show. For comparison, there were more than 40 million copies printed of the stamps from the 100 stamp sheets. The next souvenir sheet released was this 25 stamp sheet of Fort Dearborn stamps, released at the Chicago Century of Progress World's Fair, which included the convention of the American Philatelic Society, in a way, 2 souvenirs in one. There were over 456,000 copies of this sheet, more than 4 times the number printed for the White Plains sheet. Notice one more thing about this Fort Dearborn sheet. It's not perforated, and that means it's far less fragile than the White Plains sheet. I'd like to say that the White Plains souvenir sheet is expensive because it's the world's first souvenir sheet, but it isn't. While it is the first for the US, other countries had released souvenir sheets before this one. This is the first sheet that the Scott catalog lists as a souvenir sheet. This sheet of 10 stamps from Luxembourg marked the ascension of the Grand Duke William IV to the throne in 1906. I think it's dubious to call this a souvenir sheet, but Scott and many collectors disagree with me. Or how about this Luxembourg mini sheet released in 1921? It has just 5 stamps and features Duchess Charlotte. It honors the birth of Prince Jean. For some odd reason, Scott doesn't list this as a souvenir sheet. Go figure. Many people consider this 1923 sheet from Luxembourg to be the first souvenir sheet. Scott lists it as a souvenir sheet, just like the 1906 sheet. And except that it only has 1 stamp instead of 5, I can't see why this is more souvenir-like than the earlier one. This stamp shows a view of Luxembourg and was released in honor of the birth of Princess Elizabeth. Still not a souvenir in my mind. Again, collectors and Scott don't agree with me on this. An argument can be made for this 1924 sheet from Belgium. It was released for the International Stamp Show in Belgium. The cancel in the upper right shows that. This is truly a souvenir sheet. Well, I guess you might argue that the cancel is the souvenir rather than the sheet. I won't argue with you about that. But I don't think anyone can argue with this one. This sheet was issued in France in 1925 as a souvenir of the Paris International Postage Stamp Exposition. That was a year before the US issued our White Plains souvenir sheet. By comparison, the White Plains sheet seems a bit sloppy in its execution. Still, this sheet has always felt special to me, and I'm so happy to have finally added it to my collection. I hope you have a better sense now for how important pane that White Plains souvenir sheet is in U.S. stamp collecting history. A special thanks to the Spellman Museum for maintaining artifacts like this book and making them available to collectors. If you don't have a copy of the White Plains souvenir sheet, come on down to the museum. I'm sure we have plenty for you to check out. And when you're there, take advantage of the library, do some research, or maybe buy some stamps in our stamp store. It's really the only physical store I know in the whole area, in the whole Boston area at least. Anyway, hope to see you down at the Spellman sometime soon. In the meantime, happy collecting.